Jack Reynolds sat alone at a corner table in Harold's Tavern, a quiet little bar tucked away in a small North Carolina town. The dim light of the bar's neon sign flickered outside, barely visible through the thickening evening fog. Jack had just returned from his third tour overseas, and all he wanted was a moment of peace. The soft hum of the jukebox playing Johnny Cash provided a backdrop to the distant chatter of regulars, truckers, and the few locals who gathered at the bar after long, tiring days. As he sipped his drink, Jack thought about his family, his mother's cooking, the sound of his niece's voice calling his name. After months of being away, all he could think about was the comfort of home. But tonight, the solace he'd hoped for seemed distant, as though something in the air was about to shift. The door to the tavern creaked open, and in came a group of 6 men. They were older, their leather jackets adorned with patches and military insignias. Jack had seen their kind before, veterans like him, wearing their pride and their history in the form of badges and patches. But there was something different about this group. Their presence seemed to fill the room with a heavy tension. Jack didn't pay them much attention at first, but one of the men, the leader of the group, noticed him immediately. Duke, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and a commanding presence, stopped in his tracks and eyed Jack, freezing the laughter and chatter in the air. His piercing gaze lingered for a moment, and then the group fell into an uneasy silence. What do you think Duke's next move will be? Is he going to back down, or will he escalate the tension? Jack didn't flinch. He had been through worse. He had seen the looks before, the silent judgments that came from those who thought they knew what it meant to be a soldier. He didn't have time for this. But as the group made their way to the bar, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Duke and his crew ordered drinks and whispered amongst themselves, their eyes occasionally drifting toward Jack. The tension in the air thickened, and Jack could feel it. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't about to engage in a fight either. He had learned long ago that sometimes it's better to let things play out than to confront them head-on. Then, without warning, Duke walked over to Jack's table. His boots thudded on the floor, the room growing noticeably quieter with each step. The man's voice was rough, laced with disdain. "Nice uniform," Duke sneered. "Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" Jack met his gaze with calm composure. He had heard worse insults from enemies on the battlefield. "It's mine," he replied simply. "Earned it." Duke raised an eyebrow, clearly mocking Jack. "Earned it, huh? Funny, I've seen a lot of real soldiers. None of 'em wear sneakers with their fatigues. What's the deal? Trying to play dress-up for sympathy." Jack has been through 3 tours overseas. Do you think his experience shaped how he dealt with this encounter? Jack didn't respond to the jabs. He knew that engaging in a war of words wasn't worth it. Instead, he took a deep breath and maintained his composure, focusing on keeping the situation from escalating. Duke, on the other hand, seemed intent on pushing Jack further. He leaned in, his presence looming over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Walking in here like, you belong," he growled. Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said, his tone firm. The group behind Duke chuckled, their laughter growing louder, but Jack stood his ground. He had faced far worse than this. He wasn't about to let a group of bitter men take away the peace he had fought so hard to regain. If you had to choose between keeping the peace or standing up for yourself, what would you do in a situation like this? The bartender paused mid-pour, the regulars exchanged uneasy glances, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Jack knew the situation was precarious, but he wasn't about to let these men dictate his night or his dignity. "Your turn. Now that you've heard Jack's story, what do you think? Do you agree with how Jack handled the situation, or would you have responded differently? What would you do if you were in Jack's shoes? Stand your ground or try to avoid conflict? Let us know in the comments below. Also, what do you think Duke's next move will be? Will he back down or push further? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will make you think twice about the choices we all face. Jack Reynolds had just returned from his third tour overseas. After months of being in places far removed from the comfort of home, he was finally back in the quiet, dusty town of Harper's Corner. The kind of place where the familiar hum of everyday life felt almost too slow after the chaos of war. His pickup truck rumbled down the quiet street as the neon sign of Harold's Tavern flickered in the dimming twilight. The tavern, nestled between the faded gas station and a diner that never seemed to change, wasn't much. Just a worn-out bar where locals and truckers stopped for a drink after a long day. Jack parked his truck, took a deep breath, and shut the door. He wasn't here for a party. He was here to relax and think. His family, his niece's excited chatter, his mother's cooking. Those were the thoughts that filled his mind. He needed a few minutes to decompress before heading back to reality. Pushing open the creaky door, the familiar warmth of the bar enveloped him. The low hum of a jukebox playing Johnny Cash mixed with the clink of glasses and the murmur of voices. The usual crowd was there. Regular shooting pool, some quiet folks nursing their beers, and a few laughs scattered here and there. But as soon as Jack stepped inside, the group of 6 men who entered right behind him instantly commanded attention. John, Mike, Bill, Steve, Frank, and Tom, all wearing worn-out leather jackets, each with patches that told stories of battles long past. The chatter in the bar faded just a bit as their voices boomed, and their loud laughter echoed through the room. The energy shifted, and Jack couldn't help but feel a sudden weight on his shoulders. The leader of the group, Duke, an imposing man with salt and pepper beard and a stare that could freeze you in your tracks, took a few long strides ahead of the others. The moment his eyes met Jack's, there was an unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. The laughter died down, and the men's eyes lingered on Jack, sizing him up like they'd been waiting for this moment. Jack's hand tightened around the glass he was holding, but his face remained neutral. He had been through worse. Years of service had taught him how to keep his cool under pressure, but even he could feel the tension rising, thickening the air around him. He tried to ignore it, but as Duke and the others huddled at the bar, speaking in hushed voices, he could sense that something was coming. Then it happened. Duke turned and walked toward Jack's table, his boots thudding loudly on the wooden floor. His group followed, their steps heavy and deliberate. The hum of the jukebox seemed to dim, replaced by the sound of boots approaching. The bartender paused mid-pour, and everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. "Nice uniform you got there." Duke's voice cut through the silence. His words were rough, but there was something else in them, something dark. "Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" The men behind him snickered, their laughter laced with mockery. Jack remained calm, his posture relaxed, but his mind was sharp. "It's mine," Jack replied evenly, not missing a beat. "I earned it." Duke raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "Earned it, huh? You sure about that? Because I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues." He took a step closer, his breath heavy with the stench of beer. "You're just playing dress-up, aren't you? Maybe looking for a free drink, a little sympathy?" Jack didn't flinch. "I don't need sympathy, and I don't need a free drink. I'm just here to enjoy my evening." His voice was steady, unwavering. Duke's eyes burned with a mix of annoyance and disdain. "You don't look like any soldier I know. Where's your boots, your tags? Heck, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." The group erupted in laughter, their jeering filling the air. But Jack stayed silent, his gaze moving from one man to the next. He had learned long ago how to stay composed, how to pick his battles. But this felt different. What do you think Duke's next move will be? Will he back down, or will he escalate the tension even further? Jack had seen his share of conflict, but his experience in battle had taught him something more than just physical endurance. It had taught him how to keep his emotions in check. Was this really a fight worth picking? Jack has been through 3 tours overseas. Do you think his experience shaped how he dealt with this encounter? The group stood over him, and for a moment, It felt like the entire room was waiting for something to break. Duke loomed over the table, his towering figure casting a shadow across Jack. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh?" Duke sneered. "You walk in here like you belong, but you don't. Not here. Not with us." Jack met his gaze head-on, unflinching. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "And I've learned when to fight and when to walk away." But that didn't mean he wouldn't stand up for himself if the moment came. If you had to choose between keeping the peace or standing up for yourself, what would you do in a situation like this? Jack Reynolds, freshly returned from his 3rd overseas tour, wasn't looking for trouble. He just needed a quiet moment. The weight of his military service, the long months away, had taken its toll, and now all he wanted was to relax. As his pickup truck came to a slow stop in front of Harold's Tavern, a modest, down-to-earth bar in the small town of Brooksville, North Carolina, he let out a sigh. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching against the gravel, and made his way inside. The moment Jack opened the door, he was greeted by the familiar buzz of chatter and the sound of the jukebox playing classic country tunes. Harold's Tavern wasn't fancy, just a staple for locals, truckers, and anyone in need of a cold beer and a place to unwind. Jack made his way to the far end of the bar, where a corner table awaited him, offering a perfect view of the room. He ordered a glass of water, letting the coolness of the drink settle his nerves. As he sipped, his mind drifted back home. He thought of his family, his mother's cooking, his niece's excited voice as she showed him her latest school project. Those small things, the everyday comforts he'd missed so much. But his peace was short-lived. The door swung open, and in walked a group of 6 men. Jack immediately noticed their presence. They weren't just any group. They were veterans just like him. Leather jackets, patches from old military units, and the unmistakable camaraderie that came with years of shared history. They were loud, their laughter filling the room as they made their way to the bar. At the head of the group was Duke, an older man with salt and pepper hair and a beard that matched. His piercing eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Jack, they lingered. Duke's gaze hardened, a shift in the atmosphere that made the hairs on Jack's neck stand up. Jack had dealt with tension before, countless times during his tours. But this was different. Duke didn't just glance at him. He studied him, his eyes narrowing as he walked over. His group followed, all of them now silent. The laughter faded into a thick, uncomfortable silence. "Nice uniform you got there." Duke's voice was low, rough. He sneered, taking in Jack's scuffed sneakers and casual attire, clearly unimpressed. "Where'd you get it?" "A Halloween store." Jack remained calm, his eyes never leaving Duke's. The word stung, but he had been through far worse. "It's mine," he replied evenly. "Earned it." Duke raised an eyebrow. "Earned it, huh? Funny, because I've seen a lot of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues." A few of the men behind Duke chuckled, their voices laced with mockery. "You're just playing dress-up for sympathy, aren't you?" Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I don't need sympathy or free drinks. I'm just here to relax." Duke took a step closer, his large frame looming over Jack. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken challenges. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Duke sneered. "Walking in here like you belong." Jack felt the weight of the moment. He'd faced hostile forces before, on the battlefield. But here, in this small-town bar, the battlefield, was a different kind of test. What was Duke trying to prove? What do you think Duke's next move will be? Could he back down? Or was he about to escalate the tension? Jack's experiences overseas had shaped his ability to stay calm under pressure. He had faced situations where the stakes were life and death, where every decision mattered. Now, in this small bar, the stakes were different, but they still mattered. Jack had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win a battle wasn't through words or fists, but through silence and resolve. And in this moment, that was exactly what he was doing. With a measured breath, Jack met Duke's gaze and said, "I've served 3 tours overseas. I've seen more than you'll ever know." The silence in the room deepened. Duke's expression faltered for a split second before his usual cocky smirk returned. Jack's mind raced. He wasn't looking to start a fight. But the question lingered. Did Duke think Jack was just some rookie who didn't belong? Or would this be the moment when both men realized they had more in common than they thought? What do you think Duke's next move will be? Is he going to back down, or will he escalate the tension? Jack has been through 3 tours overseas. Do you think his experience shaped how he dealt with this encounter? If you were in Jack's shoes, how would you handle the situation? Would you stay calm, or would you stand your ground? The atmosphere inside Harold's Tavern was thick with tension, almost palpable. Jack Reynolds, a battle-worn veteran just back from his 3rd tour overseas, sat at the bar, nursing a cold beer. He'd always found solace in the hum of the tavern, the low murmur of conversation, and the clink of glasses. But tonight, the usual comfort was absent. His mind drifted to his family back home, his wife, his kids, wondering if things would ever feel normal again. He had changed, and so had the world around him. But that peace would soon be shattered. The door creaked open, and 6 men stepped inside, their boisterous voices cutting through the quiet like a knife. The group, all older men with the rough, weathered faces of veterans, immediately drew the eyes of everyone in the room. Their laughter was loud, intrusive, and completely out of place in the otherwise calm bar. They quickly made their way to a corner table, but their presence was anything but subtle. Jack's gaze briefly flicked over to them. One man, in particular, caught his attention. Duke, the leader of the group, was a towering figure. His salt and pepper beard and stern face exuded a sense of authority, and his sharp eyes scanned the room with the kind of coldness Jack had seen in the toughest of soldiers. As Duke's eyes settled on Jack, there was a flicker of recognition, not from any past encounter, but from the uniform Jack still wore, though it was far from military grade now. Duke, with his booming voice, broke the silence. Well, what do we have here? A soldier come home? And what's this? Sneakers with that uniform? Ain't no way that's regulation. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a brief moment, everything in the bar seemed to freeze. Jack's hand tightened around his beer bottle, but he remained silent. The tension was building, each word from Duke like a strike of a hammer against an anvil. The rest of Duke's crew, John, Mike, Bill, Steve, Frank, and Tom, chuckled under their breath, their eyes scanning Jack's worn-out boots and military shirt. It was clear they were looking for any weakness, any sign of insecurity. But Jack wasn't about to let them see it. He had faced far worse on the battlefield. Still, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Jack knew that Duke wasn't just looking for a laugh. This was a test, a way for Duke to assert dominance, to remind everyone in the bar that they were the ones in control. "What's wrong, soldier? You don't talk much? Or are you too busy staring at your shoes?" Duke taunted, his voice carrying over the room like a rolling thundercloud. The rest of the group fell silent. Even the bartender, who had witnessed his fair share of bar fights, seemed to sense the brewing storm. Jack could feel his blood pressure rise, the familiar rush of adrenaline starting to flood his system. But he had learned the hard way that sometimes silence was more powerful than words. But the question still lingered. What would he do? Would Jack stand his ground, or would he walk away, avoiding a fight that could escalate quickly? As the silence stretched on, Jack felt the weight of the years, the battles, and the experiences that had shaped him. He had been through hell and back, and no amount of ridicule from these men was going to break him. But then again, was it worth it? Was standing up to this old man and his crew worth the potential chaos that could follow? What do you think Duke's next move will be? Is he going to back down, or will he escalate the tension? The question floated in Jack's mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if the rest of the bar was waiting for the same answer. Jack had been through 3 tours overseas. His experience had shaped his every move, every decision. Do you think his time in combat influenced how he handled this confrontation? The military taught him discipline, strategy, and patience, but could that be enough in a confrontation with someone like Duke? The question was clear. If you were in Jack's shoes, would you stand up to Duke or walk away? Would you choose the high road and avoid a fight, or would you take a stand, no matter the consequences? As Jack locked eyes with Duke, the room seemed to hold its breath. Everything was on the line. The tension was unbearable, and the next few seconds would determine the course of action. Would this night end in violence, or would Jack manage to keep his cool? The air in Harold's tavern felt heavy that evening. The chatter of locals, the clink of beer mugs, and the hum of the jukebox faded into the background as Jack Reynolds stepped in. A veteran just back from his third overseas tour, he wasn't looking for trouble, just a quiet drink to calm his mind. His military jacket, though worn and faded, still felt like a shield, even though the memories of his service haunted him more than the uniform ever did. He slid onto a stool at the bar, ordered a cold beer, and tried to relax. The weight of his combat boots felt strange against the worn-out wood of the tavern, but it was a relief to be back home, far away from the chaos of war. Jack wasn't looking for confrontation, but sometimes trouble has a way of finding you, especially when you least expect it. It started with a group of older men entering the bar. 6 of them, veterans like Jack, but they carried a certain roughness in their demeanor. Their laughter filled the space, and their presence seemed to command attention. The one in front was Duke, a man with a thick salt and pepper beard, a face weathered by time and experience, and eyes that seemed to peer straight through Jack. Duke's group, John, Mike, Bill, Steve, Frank, and Tom, followed in his wake, their voices booming and raucous. They were a tight-knit group, used to looking out for each other, and tonight they had their eyes set on Jack. Duke glanced over at Jack, his gaze sharp. He seemed to notice everything. The worn military jacket, the weathered boots, but it was the sneakers that caught his attention. The cheap sneakers Jack had picked up to ease the pain of long flights home. Well, what have we here? Duke's voice cut through the noise, low and threatening. A soldier, huh? Back from your tour. He paused, eyeing Jack's sneakers with disdain. Is that how soldiers dress now? Sneakers? Hell, if I knew you could get away with that, I might have worn some myself. The laughter erupted around the bar. The other men joined in, their eyes on Jack, and it was clear they were looking for a reaction. This wasn't just about the shoes. It was a challenge. Maybe this one's a fake, Duke continued, leaning closer. You know the type. They throw on a uniform, stroll into a bar like they're some kind of hero. But we know better, don't we, boys? Jack could feel the heat rising in his chest, the familiar tightness in his throat. This wasn't his first run-in with people who doubted his service. But something about Duke's smug expression and the way the others nodded along made it sting. Do you think Jack will stand up to Duke, or will he back down? The question flickered in Jack's mind. Was this really the time to prove himself? Or was it smarter to let it go and enjoy his drink? Duke's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jack wondered if this was about more than just the sneakers. Maybe they were testing him, testing whether he was worthy of their respect. Or maybe they were just looking for someone to put down, someone to feel superior to. Mike leaned in, a crooked smile on his face. You ever been overseas, boy? Or are you just wearing that uniform for the free drinks? His voice dripped with sarcasm. Bill chimed in, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Hell, I bet this guy couldn't even handle a real firefight. What do you think, Steve? Think he could hack it? Steve grinned, shaking his head as if it was all a joke. Jack clenched his fists around his beer, the urge to stand up and shout something back boiling inside him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that they weren't interested in the truth. They were looking for a fight, a reason to put him in his place. Jack has been through 3 tours overseas. Do you think his experience shaped how he dealt with this encounter? Jack thought about the countless hours he had spent in the field, facing dangers, losing friends. Did these men think their words could really make him flinch? He was no stranger to battle, but this was different. They weren't attacking his courage. They were attacking his identity, his pride, the very things that made him who he was. What would you do in Jack's shoes? Stand your ground or walk away from the confrontation? Would you stay quiet as Jack did and let the insults roll off, or would you give them a piece of your mind? As the taunts continued, the tension in the room became unbearable. Jack had two choices. He could either leave, forget about these men, and enjoy the rest of his night, or he could face them head on, fight for his pride. But then again, who were these men to challenge him? And if he did fight back, what would it prove? Would it change their opinions, or would it only make him feel more alone? The choice was his, but it wasn't just about the sneakers. It was about his identity, his journey. And sometimes, the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with silence. Jack Reynolds stepped into Harold's tavern with a sigh, the weight of his military jacket suddenly feeling heavier. After 3 tours overseas, he was done with combat, but combat had a way of lingering in the mind. Sitting at the bar, he let the cool, bitter taste of beer settle on his tongue. He didn't need any more excitement, not tonight. He needed silence. But silence was a rare commodity at Harold's. The door swung open, and in walked a group of older men, veterans, just like Jack. Their laughter rang out loud enough to rattle the old wooden sign hanging above the door. Jack glanced over. The group was large, and their presence commanded attention. At the center of them was Duke, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and a stare that could cut through steel. His eyes immediately found Jack's, sizing him up in a heartbeat. Well, Duke's voice cut through the air like a razor. A soldier in sneakers? What happened to boots, son? Did they run out at the Army surplus store? The group of men chuckled, and Jack could feel their eyes boring into him. Jack didn't flinch. His hands gripped the bar, steady, controlled. He knew what they were doing. They were testing him. But Jack had spent too many years learning how to keep his composure, especially in the face of provocation. He'd been trained for this. The military had taught him that sometimes the best way to win a battle wasn't by striking back. It was by showing strength through restraint. He took a long sip of his beer, his gaze unflinching. I serve my country. What I wear doesn't change that. The silence that followed was thick. Duke raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Jack's calmness. The other men looked at each other, sensing the shift. They had expected Jack to react, to get defensive, maybe even start a fight. But Jack wasn't here for that. What do you think Duke's next move will be? Is he going to back down, or will he escalate the tension? The question was on everyone's mind. Would Duke push further, or would he recognize Jack's calmness as strength, not weakness? Jack kept his eyes on Duke, feeling the tension rise, but refusing to let it get to him. The years of service had taught him more than just how to fight. They had taught him how to endure. Jack has been through 3 tours overseas. Do you think his experience shaped how he dealt with this encounter? The question echoed in Jack's mind. He had been to places that had tested his limits, both physically and mentally. And now, he was being tested in a very different way. Duke took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Jack's. For a moment, it looked like the situation might escalate, but instead, Duke just smirked and turned away, signaling to the group that it was time to move on. The tension in the room slowly dissipated, but Jack remained on edge. This wasn't over. Not yet. The men began to talk amongst themselves, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Jack finished his beer, his mind still processing what had just happened. He wasn't sure if Duke had backed down, or if he was just biding his time. But Jack wasn't interested in a fight. He was here to find peace, to live without the chaos of the battlefield. And that, he thought, was the true victory. Jack Reynolds sat at the far end of Harold's tavern, nursing a cold beer after a long day. The warmth of the bar and the buzz of conversation were a welcome contrast to the quiet solitude he'd felt after returning home from his 3rd tour overseas. He was here to unwind, to process the flood of emotions that had been building up ever since he stepped off the plane. But as soon as he took a seat, a group of older men walked in, their loud laughter and confident strides filling the room. They were veterans just like him, and they wasted no time in making their presence known. The man leading the group, Duke, stood out immediately. His salt and pepper beard and weathered face gave him an air of authority. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes landing on Jack almost instantly. There was something in the way he looked at Jack, a glint of challenge. Without missing a beat, Duke sauntered over to Jack's table, the rest of the group following closely behind. "Well, well," Duke said with a grin, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "Look at this guy, fresh off the battlefield. Huh? You don't look like any soldier I've seen before. Those shoes. Are you sure you're one of us, or are you just here for the free drinks?" Jack's stomach tightened, but he kept his cool. His military training had taught him to remain composed, especially when provoked. He had dealt with hostile situations overseas, faced down enemies who wanted nothing more than to see him fall. So, the jabs from Duke didn't faze him. Not immediately, anyway. But the group didn't let up. Bill, one of the men in the back, laughed loudly and added, "Yeah, I don't know Duke. He's got those fancy sneakers on. Looks more like a college kid than a veteran." Mike chimed in, "You're telling me this guy served? I thought soldiers wore boots, not whatever those things are." Jack could feel the eyes of the entire group on him, the weight of their judgment settling over him like a thick fog. His grip tightened around his beer bottle, but he didn't respond. He knew how these situations went. The more you react, the worse it gets. Silence was his ally here. Duke, sensing Jack's calm, leaned in closer, his voice low and steady. "What's the matter, soldier? No words for us? You're going to let us talk down to you like that?" He gave Jack a sharp look, the challenge clear. "Tell you what, prove you're a real vet. Tell us what it was like over there. Or maybe you're just here for the attention." The air between them grew thick. Jack could hear the faint murmur of conversations around him, but it all felt distant, like he was in a bubble. His thoughts raced, but he kept his composure, focusing on his breathing. He wasn't going to lose control. Not here, not now. In his mind, Jack replayed the countless moments he had learned to remain still, to breathe through the chaos, to not let anything, take him out of his element. It wasn't that he was afraid of Duke or his friends. He had faced much worse. But Jack knew that sometimes walking away was the best response. It took more strength to ignore the taunts than to engage. But even as he thought this, a question lingered in his mind. Would it have been different if he stood up to Duke? Would he have earned their respect? Or would it have escalated into something worse? Jack finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not here to prove anything to you," he said, his eyes meeting Duke's with quiet intensity. "I've seen enough. I've done enough. I don't need to prove myself to anyone." The silence that followed felt heavy, as if everyone in the tavern was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Duke didn't back down, but he seemed to respect Jack's response, if only slightly. With a grunt, he turned away, motioning for his group to follow. As they walked back to their table, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also a lingering unease. He had handled the situation without confrontation, but the question remained. Did he do the right thing? What do you think Jack should have done in that situation? Should he have stood up to Duke more aggressively? Or was walking away the better move? Let us know in the comments below. The atmosphere at Harold's Tavern was tense, the kind of tension that lingered in the air, thick and palpable. Jack Reynolds, a battle-hardened veteran, had just returned home after 3 long tours overseas. He was used to the harshness of combat, but nothing could prepare him for the cold, mocking stares of the group of older veterans sitting at the bar. Jack wasn't one to back down easily, but he had learned the hard way that there was power in silence, power in choosing not to engage. Tonight, though, the situation was different. As he walked in, His boots echoed against the worn wooden floor, and the clink of glasses and low chatter seemed to fade for a moment. He felt their eyes on him, the men at the bar, each with their own story of the battlefield. And among them, there was Duke, the leader of the group. Duke was an imposing figure. His graying beard, broad shoulders, and sharp gaze commanded respect or fear, depending on who you asked. He was the kind of man who never backed down from a fight, whether physical or verbal. He locked eyes with Jack, sizing him up, and that was when the mocking started. "Look at that, boys," Duke said, his voice rough like gravel. "What do we have here? A soldier in sneakers? I thought real soldiers wore boots." His group erupted in laughter, a mixture of genuine amusement and perhaps a little too much alcohol. Jack could feel the burn of their gazes, each one making him more of a target. The tension rose with every second, every sarcastic comment thrown in Jack's direction. They questioned his service, implied that he was just playing dress-up, that he wasn't really a soldier. "What's the matter, Jack? You lose your real boots somewhere." Frank, one of the younger vets in the group, sneered. For a moment, Jack felt the familiar pulse of anger rise in him, but he quickly tamped it down. He'd learned through years of service to control his emotions, to never let anyone see him break. And tonight, he wasn't about to let Duke or his group of old-timers get to him. He leaned back against the bar, his fingers tapping the edge of his glass. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Jack said calmly, his voice steady but firm. "I've served 3 tours overseas. I've earned every scar, every inch of this uniform." His eyes locked onto Duke's, challenging him, daring him to say more. The room went quiet for a moment. The laughter died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Duke's gaze softened, but only slightly. He knew better than to push too far, especially when it came to someone who had seen as much as Jack. But the tension still hung thick in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. "3 tours, huh?" Duke muttered, his voice lower now, almost respectful. "I guess that counts for something." Jack nodded, then turned back to his drink. The fight for tonight over. He didn't need to prove himself. Not to them, not to anyone. The room buzzed with murmurs, but Jack didn't care. He knew his worth. He had earned it, and he had nothing left to prove. What do you think Jack should have done in that situation? Should he have stood up to Duke more aggressively, or was walking away the better move? It was a quiet evening. At Harold's Tavern, a small, dimly lit bar tucked away in the corner of a sleepy town. The usual crowd was there, local regulars nursing their beers and chatting softly. But tonight, there was something different in the air. Jack Reynolds, a recently returned combat veteran, was sitting alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey. His military uniform, worn and slightly faded, was a stark contrast to the casual attire of the others around him. As Jack sipped his drink, a group of older men walked in. 6 of them, all veterans of various wars, entered the bar with loud laughter and clapping each other on the back. Duke, the leader of the group, was the first to catch Jack's eye. A man in his 60s, his thick salt and pepper beard gave him a grizzled appearance that matched his tough demeanor. He scanned the room before his gaze fell on Jack, and the loud chatter of his friends seemed to die down a bit. The tension in the air was almost palpable. "What's this? Another hero walks into my bar?" Duke said with a smirk. His voice was thick with mockery as he motioned toward Jack's uniform. "Looks like someone's been playing dress-up. You a real soldier, or just here for the free drinks?" The group erupted in laughter, and Jack felt his jaw clench. They hadn't been subtle. He could feel their eyes on him, the skepticism, the judgment. He'd seen that look before. Men who hadn't been where he'd been, hadn't fought the battles he had fought. Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he took another slow sip of his drink and met Duke's gaze squarely. "I've served 3 tours overseas," Jack replied, his voice steady and calm. "I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The other men in the group were now silent, watching their leader. Duke's face remained hard, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The laughter died down. Jack could feel his pulse steady, his breathing controlled. He had learned long ago in combat that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Duke eyed Jack for a long moment, his brow furrowed, but he didn't back down. 3 tours, huh? Guess that's enough to earn your place here, huh? What? Are you some kind of tough guy now? The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Jack didn't rise to it. He knew better than to engage in a battle of egos. He had been through too much to let a bunch of old soldiers provoke him into a fight. His years in service had taught him how to remain level-headed, how to hold his ground without resorting to aggression. The air in the bar was thick. The only sound the occasional clink of glass and the hum of the jukebox in the corner. Duke studied Jack for a moment longer before breaking eye contact and turning to his group. His posture shifted, as if the brief encounter had caused him to reconsider something. The other men began murmuring among themselves, their expressions now mixed with curiosity and uncertainty. Jack leaned back in his chair, not smug but calm, in control. "You don't need to believe me. I've got nothing to prove." The words were simple, but there was a weight to them. He wasn't here to fight or to entertain anyone's doubts. Jack had learned the hard way that the most important battles were often the ones you chose not to fight. Duke glanced back at him, a slow nod forming on his lips. There was respect now, though it wasn't easily given. "All right, soldier, you've got your story. Now, let's see if you can handle a drink without spilling it." The tension that had once filled the room began to dissipate. Jack had stood his ground, and Duke had, at least for now, backed off. But there was something unspoken between them, a mutual understanding born from experience. What do you think Jack should have done in that situation? Should he have stood up to Duke more aggressively? Or was walking away the better move? The atmosphere inside Harold's tavern had shifted dramatically. What started as a casual evening of drinks and chatter quickly escalated into a battle of wills. Jack Reynolds, a seasoned veteran who had recently returned from 3 overseas tours, found himself at the center of a storm. Surrounded by a group of older men, former soldiers from different branches of the military, Jack was about to experience a test of patience and character that he hadn't anticipated. The group, led by Duke, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and a reputation for being the tough guy around town, started making remarks about Jack's attire. His camouflage jacket, worn with a pair of faded jeans and sneakers, didn't sit well with Duke and his crew. The mockery began slowly, but the tension was palpable, hanging thick in the air like the smoke from the cigarettes that burned in the corner of the bar. "You're telling me you served in the military, kid?" Duke sneered, sizing up Jack from head to toe. "Those shoes are about as military as a beach chair." The men around the table chuckled, their laughter booming across the tavern, causing other patrons to glance over. Jack, who had just sat down to enjoy a drink after a long week, felt the heat rising, but instead of snapping back or showing any sign of weakness, Jack remained calm, his expression unreadable. Years of combat had taught him something valuable: patience and control over one's emotions. He wasn't about to let a group of strangers undermine his service or his integrity. Duke wasn't about to back down, though. The more Jack ignored the jabs, the more insistent Duke became. "Come on, Jack. Prove to us you're the real deal. Military men don't wear sneakers. They wear boots, proper ones." The tension in the room escalated. The atmosphere felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. But Jack's response was nothing short of composed. "I've served 3 tours overseas," Jack said, his voice steady and strong, cutting through the chatter like a knife. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone here. Not to you, not to anyone. I've earned my stripes, and no one here can take that away from me." His words landed with the force of a punch. The men at the table fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the faint clink of glass as the bartender wiped down the counter. Duke, despite his earlier bravado, seemed momentarily taken aback. He sat back in his chair, eyeing Jack with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The laughter from his crew had died down, replaced by the quiet murmur of the other patrons. The power dynamics in the room had shifted. Was Jack's confidence enough to defuse the situation? Could his composed response cause Duke to reconsider his challenge? The group's leader looked at him, trying to gauge if Jack was just bluffing or if there was something more behind those calm words. But instead of escalating the conflict, Duke merely nodded a slow, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. Jack hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown a punch. But he had done something far more powerful. He had shown unwavering confidence in himself and his service, proving that his worth didn't need to be validated by anyone else's standards. What's your take on Jack's response? Do you think Jack's calm and measured approach was the right move, or should he have confronted Duke more directly? How would you have handled the situation? Jack's decision to remain composed speaks volumes about his inner strength and his belief in the value of patience. Sometimes, the best response to aggression is not to engage in the same way. What do you think? Was Jack right to walk away without further confrontation, or should he have stood his ground more forcefully? This situation not only highlights Jack's resilience, but also underscores a vital life lesson. True confidence doesn't come from seeking validation or approval from others. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm, regardless of who challenges you.